Hello everyone, and as you can see here, I have plants for my demonstration today because today we are going to be talking about what's the difference, top cut, mid cut, and base cut. So people might be wondering, like if a seller tells you, hey, this one's better because it's a top cut, or if you want to buy the mother plant, this is the mother plant. So what are all these terms and which cut should you be buying? So I'll be answering most commonly asked questions, and hopefully at the end of this video you'll be able to decide for yourself which cut do you prefer. So the plants here at the back, what you are seeing are actually examples because I have cut and extended a lot of them. Now please take note, for the purpose of brevity and clarity, I am going to focus on trailing aroids because number one, these are the examples that I have and I can show you. And number two, their growth patterns are similar to other plants. However, it is important to note that the things here that you will see does not apply to all the plants. There are other plants that have different growth patterns, like succulents. So please take that into consideration before you start thinking about how you're gonna cut your plants. All right, let's begin. Let's talk about the first thing. What are the different cuts? And there are three that we have to consider. There's the top cut, the mid cut, and the base cut. So the top cut, as its name speaks for itself, it's the topmost part of the entire plant. Now the mid cut is just in between the top and the base cut. So there are parts in the middle that can actually grow, and you can cut that off so that they become their own plant. And then you have the base cut. So let's look at it from a plant example. Here we have the Monstera acuminata mint mottled as our example for today. This is the topmost part of the plant. If I cut here, there are already roots growing at the back. If I cut here, it becomes the top cut. Now if I cut here and then I cut here, which is just before the base, now this becomes the mid cut. So this section here with leaves, a lot of leaves. And if you look after you have cut the top and you have cut the mid, you can see there's going to be a plant remaining, and that is the base cut. Actually, this plant is the base cut of my original acuminata mint mottled. This was the one that I bought a year ago at Horti Filipina 2025, and it has grown beautifully. And I actually did a top cut for this and made it its own plant, and I'm gonna show you what that looks like. I am sitting a little further away from the camera because it's difficult to get the entire plant in the frame. So this is a result of the top cut that I did from the original base plant or the mother plant. And if you can see, I've also extended the pole, so it's growing really tall. And look how big the leaves are. Like, it started off already big and it continued, like, look at that. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that. Look at how big the leaves are. I hope I don't damage this plant. It's more than the size of my hand. And the leaves continue to get bigger and bigger as it grows to the top. So that is a result of a top cut, and that's why some people actually prefer a top cut because they can already grow big leaves. They're in a much more mature form. And this is because the stems are also thicker. Now, is there a potential that a top cut will have smaller leaves? Yes, there's a potential. It all goes back to the roots. If you have a poor root system, then it's not a guarantee that it's going to produce those really nice leaves. It might even restart to smaller leaves because it's all about sustaining the plant. Thankfully for me, because I'm using moss poles, they have really good root systems that are established so that if I extend the pole, it's going to produce really large leaves. So have a look at this. This is the top cut. And this is the base cut. So the base cut is also growing beautifully, but the top cut has really, really big leaves. So what happens if you start doing mid cuts? Well, with mid cuts, there's two things that can happen. One is you can also produce big leaves like the one you see in the top cut. Or you can cut the multiple nodes here, and if they have their own root systems, they can be their own mother plants. So some might wonder, is a mother plant and a base plant the same thing? Well, the term mother plant just refers to the original plant where all the propagations come from. So yes, it could be used interchangeably. So a mid cut could be a mother plant, a top cut could be a mother plant, Because ultimately, if they become their own plants where you're getting cuttings from, they become the base plant, right? So in this case, I love the top cut. And the mid cut, well, I didn't make any, but I know I can make multiple plants. But with the base plant, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I love my base plants because they also start growing well, especially if the root system is still good. So I'm gonna show you something. It's basically what happens after I do the cut and how the plant will grow after doing a cut. I don't know if you can see this, but look at this. This is the first leaf that popped up after I did a cut. But it didn't last very long. Immediately, a new leaf came up, this small one. And then when it started climbing, it started making this bigger leaf, and bigger leaf, and bigger leaf. So I don't think that a plant resets when you do a cut. But what happens is the plant has to establish itself slowly because the stem is also a factor. If your base cut started with a thinner stem, obviously it's not gonna produce those giant leaves. But as soon as it starts growing and it starts having those thicker stems, then you can expect the leaves are going to follow. So base cuts, you just have to be patient. And if sellers tend to sell them cheaper, why not get it if you're trying to save up on your budget? It's all about patience. Now, let's talk about price. Most people know that top cuts tend to be more expensive. You'll hear a seller say, hey, this is the top cut, this is pricier. Let's say this is priced at 5,000. Now here's the base cut and it's priced at 3,000. And I'm gonna give you an example of that price difference. I'm not gonna say what the price was, but I will tell you that I bought this plant, this variegated panduriforme. It's a base cut. And the plant beside it was its top cut. And they were selling the top cut of this for at least about 25% more expensive than this one. However, I'm not bothered. I am very experienced with the panduriforme and I know I can make it grow. And look, even just a few days after Horti Filipina, have a look at what's going on. There's a new leaf growing. So it's exciting when you see something like this. It's a base plant, you're making it grow. And this is not the only base plant that I bought. Here's another mother plant that I bought, which was also cheaper than the top cut that they were selling. Right here is my Monstera bulbasaur, and this is a mother plant. Now, interesting thing, the seller told me, si Bubuyog, that this is actually shooting off 2 shoots. So that's something that I got excited about. It's not just about like, oh, is it a base plant? Is it a top cut? It's also about the growth that's happening. And I'm gonna show you with a closer look what's going on here. But before that, I wanna tell you, a few days after Horti Filipina, I already have a new leaf. So providing really good conditions is also a factor. And now I'm a bit closer so I can show you what's going on. This Monstera bulbasaur was sold to me with the note that it was producing 2 shoots. So what does that mean for base plants? So the advantage of base plants compared to top cuts is that they have potential to make multiple shoots. Isn't that great? So especially if you're thinking about propagation, you can look at mother plants as a potential to produce more plants. I'm gonna show you. So this was the first shoot that it produced, and it's already producing a second shoot here at the bottom. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's over here. There's like this tiny shoot here. So that is one of the potentials of base cuts, and that's why I don't think that base cuts are a bad thing. There's potential in them, and it's really up to the keeper to figure out what they really want for themselves. Now, I want to clarify something about plant growth speed, because some people are assuming that if it's a top cut, immediately it's going to be the faster growing plant. But that is not always true. Why? Because sometimes when you do a top cut and the roots are not very well established, you need to first make the roots grow so that the plant can catch up with that momentum that it already built. So in some cases, like for example, these climbing plants, what the keeper would do is probably cut it and let it stay like that for a bit before removing it from the mother plant. This is so that it can establish its roots better, it's still in a familiar medium, or in a case where you are not rooting it into a moss pole, After you cut the top cut, you put it in water for water propagation so that the roots will grow. And to continue about plant growth speed, don't think that mid cuts are not going to do as well as top cuts. Some people are surprised that even after doing a mid cut, when they pot it, it has the potential to start exploding new growth, especially if that mid-cut already has well-established roots. And that is why, in my case, I'm very fond of moss bowls, because whether it's a top cut, the mid-cut, or the base cut, all three will have wonderfully established roots. And this is so important. It's not just about what you see outside, it's also what you see inside and underneath. And this reminds me of a story. If you remember from our childhood folktale, there was a story about Mating and Pagong, which is the monkey and the turtle. And this is something related to base cuts and top cuts, because in this story, Mating and Pagong were actually at the river, and there was a banana tree that was swimming downstream. And they decided, hey, let's get this tree and split it in half. However, how they split it in half was there was a top half and the bottom half. Now Mating, looking at the top half with lots of leaves, thought, hey, this is already a live plant that I would like to have so it can start producing fruit. Took the top half and planted it in his ground. Now Pagong, on the other hand, was more experienced and said, I'm gonna get the bottom half. So he took the bottom half and placed it on the ground. And what do you think happened? The bottom half was the one that produced more leaves and started producing fruit. And Mating's top half actually withered and died. So let's not get technical about this, because I know some of you will say about how bananas grow and all the other things. But the lesson here basically is that we have to look as well at what's underneath, that not everything pretty is the basis for growth. So in our case, sometimes a plant can lose all its leaves because somebody damaged or cut it off. But if the root system is good, it's bound to recover. It's bound to produce those beautiful leaves again. Lastly, let's talk about base cut growth. So if the base cut has a smaller stem, it can still produce fast growth as long as the roots are good. However, the leaf size may not be the same as your top cut, because of course, leaf size is all about the size of your stem. However, if it starts growing more and the stem size starts expanding, of course, you're gonna get much bigger plants. I'm going to show you an example of this plant that I got as a small top cut. It's the Philodendron glorious, and over the months it started to grow and have thicker stems, of which I was able to do a top cut right after because of how large the leaves started to grow. So here we have the Philodendron glorious, and you can see it has a beautiful new leaf. But what I'm going to show you is how thin the stems were as a top cut, and the leaves were actually around smaller than this size. So this is the stem. Can I get closer? Look how thin the stems are here. But if you look at the top part where the growth is happening, it's actually thicker. Thin stem here, thicker here. Now, another thing I want to show you, if you take a closer look, is what we have here was the tiny leaf that's already withered. So this was the first growth that it produced when I did the top cut. Now note, there were no leaves at all. So what was going on? There were actually dormant nodes in this plant that after doing the cut, this is common with base plants, it starts off first with a small leaf, and then when given enough time, it produces a nice leaf now. And if you can see, even if it's already producing large leaves before, it's not going to produce exactly large leaves like what we have there. It's only going to produce what the stem is able to make. So look at this is a thinner stem. Now I'm going to show you the top cut so you know what it looks like. And here we have the top cut of that mother plant that you just saw. So look at how large the leaves are. And this actually was started from a very small Philodendron glorious, and that's why I get excited about these things, because it started with leaves this small, and look how big this one compared to that. Like, it's probably just a third or a fourth of this entire leaf. So I'm very happy with this growth, and you can see a new leaf popping up. Look at that. You're doing so well. So you can see here, top cuts, they can really produce large mature leaves because of the stem that it already has, which is a really thick stem. Look at that. Compare it to the one that we saw a while ago. This is like really thick stems. So it's all about establishing that growth with top cuts, and of course, having a really good root system. If you don't have a good root system, you can't expect that explosive growth that you're looking for. So base cut and then top cut. Now for mid cuts, I don't have much example to show you because I rarely do mid cuts. However, there may be times that you need to do a mid cut, especially if you're trying to rescue a plant. What are we talking about? Like for example, if you have like a long trailing philodendron and you have root rot at the base and you want to have multiple plants, so you're going to do mid cuts and cut them off so you can have several propagations, and I'm going to show you an example of that. This here is from my original Adansonii Indonesian mint plant. And what happened was it overgrew because I was not able to take care of it when it was moved to the family house. So it grew very long, it did not establish roots very well because it was extending way beyond the moss pole. And because I wanted to restart the plant, what I did was cut all the mid parts with active nodes in them where there are leaves as well. And I'm doing water propagation. So I'm gonna show you what it looks like. So this is the root. This is kind of this is what the root looks like. And not all roots like this. Some are long, some are quite short. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to make the roots pop out more before I plant them on soil. And maybe I'll start selling this plant. So Adansonii Indonesian mint mid cuttings that I am doing water propagations on. Question. Is it always good to do water propagation instead of just rooting it directly on the soil? I guess I don't have that much experience yet to say what exactly is the best, but I'll tell you this. Based on my experience, if you do water propagation for your cuttings, the tendency is they will be slower to grow when you move them to the soil. And I think this has to do with some kind of like turgor pressure, I think, with the roots. So if the roots experiences a lot of water, and if you move it into a place where it doesn't have a lot of water, then it will slow down in growth. So do consider that when you're doing multiple propagation cuttings for your mid cut. Now, there might be a question that not a lot of people ask, which is which cut is riskier? So we're talking about risk here, especially if you're dealing with very expensive plants. The answer to that is it all goes back to the roots. So for the top cut, if it has well-established roots, go ahead, it's healthy, it's going to be less risk. For the mid cut, same story, the roots, how is it? Is it something that's already established or do you need to water prop it? And lastly, the base plant, which is the one that has all the roots. It's not always a guarantee that the base plant will be the healthiest. Why? Because sometimes plant keepers are actually cutting the plant to save the rest of the plant because the base cut has rotting roots. So look into the roots to know whether this plant is risky or not. That is why I, as a plant keeper, I love looking at roots. It's so fascinating to me, looking at the health, how it's growing, where it's growing, and for my moss poles, I prefer it clear because I want to see what the growth is like behind them. It makes me excited to see the roots. Whenever I repot a plant, I always take pictures of the roots because if I repot them again, I want to see what it looks like after that growth in its new pot. But if you're a beginner, which cut should you be getting? Top or base? Well, it still goes back to the roots. If you want a top cut, make sure it's rooted. It's gonna be okay, it's easier to grow. But if you want the base cut because you want to see how it grows and you want to be part of that journey, then base cut is the choice. However, when it comes to pricing, you're gonna expect that some plant keepers are going to say the top cut is more expensive while the base cut is cheaper. And that's why I personally got a Panduriforme that was a base cut because I didn't want to spend too much money, but I really did like this plant. And if you have no choice, a mid-cut is okay, provided that the mid-cut has already established roots. This is where having a conversation with your vendor is very important, especially if you trust your vendor. Of course, those who are trying to trick their buyers are not going to tell the full truth about the plant. So ask questions and figure out for yourself if which cut is best for you. Before you start buying a plant, and if you're already considering which cut you're getting, I'd like you to go through this checklist. Number one, the leaves. Look at the condition of the leaves and how they're growing. If it's healthy, that's a good sign. If it's yellowing and the yellow is more obvious throughout the plant, do reconsider. Number two is the roots. You want to see the roots growing. If you can't see it, you want to smell it. I know it sounds weird, but smelling the roots for root rot is actually helpful. Root rot has this decaying smell that's rather obvious. So if you just smell the plant, you can actually tell if that has root rot or not. That, again, not guaranteed that you will know. It really varies from person to person. Personally, I'm able to tell if I smell because I'm rather sensitive, but some people couldn't tell the difference between a pot with root rot and a pot that's just perfectly healthy. They're just gonna say, I smell earth. Aside from the leaf and the roots, you also want to check the stem. As I mentioned a while ago, thinner stems going to produce smaller leaves. Thicker stems are going to produce larger leaves. But you also want to check active nodes. Some people might be saying, hey, look at this plant. It's a cutting. It's beautiful. It has beautiful roots. Look at this clear pot, a lot of roots. But if you take a good look at it, there's no active node. There might be less chances of it producing a leaf. So check for dormant nodes that become activated after the cut. This right here is a dormant growth point. So if you cut just above it, we can expect the growth to come from here. Lastly, you want to check for pest damage because aside from the overall health of the plant, you want to see what kind of flora and fauna is growing around the plant. So we want to check if there are spider mites or mealybugs because you don't want to be taking a plant with you that's going to infect your other plants at home. So check for pests. Oh, I forgot to mention, if you're doing a cutting, make sure you don't cut while the leaf is still growing. Allow the leaf to grow out and unfurl and maybe harden a bit before you start cutting. You don't want to interrupt its growth. I'm going to show you an example of what an interruption looks like. This is my Philodendron Splendid and it has beautiful leaves. However, look at this one. This is a result of me cutting it before I allowed the leaf to unfurl. Oh, it was such a disappointment because this would have been a beautiful plant. It still is actually, but lesson learned, I will no longer cut a plant if it's still pushing out a new leaf. I will wait for it to push out that new leaf before I do anything to it. Even repotting, I won't repot a plant when there's still a new leaf coming out, unless it's an emergency. So in cases like this, where there's a new leaf pushing out, do not cut. Be more patient. And you'll get that beautiful plant that you want, especially since the new leaf is actually the biggest that's gonna be among the other leaves, as long as, of course, your plant is healthy. And in conclusion, we're gonna summarize everything. Top cut if you want instant gratification and beautiful lush leaves. Mid cut if you're going for something cheaper, something probably not as expensive as your base and top cut. And mother plant if you're looking for more offshoots, potential to grow the plant at the beginning of its journey and ride with it until it gets those big beautiful leaves. And ultimately, it's all about your preference. What are your needs? What are your wants? And then you decide from there if you want to get a top, mid, or base cut. Now, before we go, I want to ask you, what's your preference? Do you prefer a top cut, mid cut, or bottom cut? Comment down below which you would choose. You may have noticed this is now different from the other vlogs that I've been doing, which is more of featuring Horti Filipina and talking about my plant hauls and of course my experiences with plants. Now I'm trying to go into educational videos. I want to know if this is something that you like watching or you find helpful, because I want to share my experiences and show you examples in real life. So please let me know if you want to see more videos like this. Like and subscribe.